I spent some time this week Googling the phrase peace like a river. I was curious to try and get at where its origin is from. If you consider the phrase by itself, peace like a river, it's meant to evoke a sense, a feeling of peacefulness. If you walk down alongside a river, the whole atmosphere can be one that's quite peaceful. And yet the river itself, if you look just at the river itself, it's not always peaceful. For one, a river is always moving. A river is not at rest. And if you take a river like the Gunpowder River near us, it's got a whole series of falls and twists and turns. The river itself is not very peaceful, yet the whole scene, taken all together, can be quite peaceful. You've got the woods and the sun, the peacefulness of walking along a path. When I was looking for the history of this phrase, everything I found attributed to one of two songs, which we've sung this morning. The song we just sang, It Is Well With My Soul, written by an Englishman in 1873. Horatio Spafford, I think I've mentioned the story before other times. Horatio Spafford lost his family on a transatlantic voyage from England over to the U.S. And when he made the trip after his family, he asked the ship's captain to stop over the spot where his family had drowned. And from that spot, he wrote the words to that hymn that we just sang. It's quite a testimony to faith to say, it is well with my soul, even in this spot in the Atlantic. And then there was the other songs that everything went back to, which was the spiritual the kids sang this morning. I've got peace like a river. Now, while the spiritual probably predates Horatio Spafford, it's hard to know if he knew that song or if he coined the phrase separately or if the phrase was common and well known in that time. The phrase itself isn't actually in the Bible. I looked there too. And yet it's in those two Christian songs that were composed by persons walking through their own valley of the shadow of death and showing great and steadfast faith even while walking through a time of darkness. And if this starts squeaking too much, let me know and I'll turn it off. And I'll speak louder instead. One of the things you know if you've had peace coursing through you while walking through the valley of the shadow of death is that there's no way that peace came from you. As we just read this morning in the gospel, peace comes from Jesus. He said, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Jesus gives us his own peace. And that's how we cannot be troubled or afraid or worried or upset. When we try to create our own peace, then we're often still anxious or tense. Anyone identify with this? I see a couple nods. Okay. But when it's Jesus' peace, then it flows through us. I think we're pretty comfortable with saying that love comes from God, yet we don't often extend that to the other fruits of the Spirit as well. If it's a fruit of the Spirit, though, then it obviously comes from the Spirit. It comes from God. And peace is one of those fruits, just like love and joy and gentleness and self-control and all of those that are listed there. I think, though, we tend to forget that peace comes from God as well. Peace does not come from us initially. There was one December a few years ago, I helped the angel tree organizer at church deliver Christmas presents to Hispanic families that I could translate for her for Spanish. And like many volunteer physicians in the church, she was starting to feel burned out and getting a little tired of doing that particular ministry for so many years that she had done it. And in our conversation in the car, one thing she told me, she was trying to rationalize it, saying, I know God doesn't give us more than we can handle. And it's a common enough sin. I'm sure we've all said it at some point in time. And so that's not actually in the Bible any more than peace like a river is. Saying, I'm sure God won't give us more than we can handle is a misparaphrase of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, which is that God won't let you be tested. Let me turn this off. I don't know if it's bothering you, but it's in my ear. What Paul says in 1 Corinthians is that God won't let us be tested beyond what we can bear. And that when we are tested, he will give us the strength to endure that test. And then what I pointed out to this person actually was that sometimes we give ourselves more than we can handle. It's not that God doesn't give us more than we can handle, it's that we give ourselves more than we can handle. Sometimes we take on burdens that God didn't mean for us to take on. Either we didn't pray about it first, or we didn't listen to God's response to our prayer, or we just assume that because it's a good thing to do, therefore we should do it. We're not always good at setting boundaries or saying no when what we really need is to take care of ourselves for a day or for a season. It's hard to say no when you see a need. Yet if we feel some hesitation about responding to that need, then I think we certainly need to pray about it first. At the last district clergy gathering a couple weeks ago, our presenter was a nutritionist. Imagine that, pastors need nutritionists, right? And in talking about taking care of ourselves, one thing she said was, if you can't solve it right away, then give it back. It's not yours to solve. And I thought, aha, and that's how we get peace. We give it back when it's not yours to solve. I mentioned last week that sometimes we put stumbling blocks in our own way. And I think sometimes it's also our own fault when we're not at peace with ourselves. We've taken something on that we shouldn't have, or we didn't pray first, or we figured we could handle it because we always have. Yet what God wants is for us to lean on Him. Trust in the Lord with your own heart and lean not on your own understanding. Leaning only and exclusively on our own understanding is what often gets us into trouble, or into a place that is the opposite of peace. Peace does not originate with us, and it does not come from the world either. But Jesus said, peace is what I leave with you, my own peace I give to you, and I do not give it as the world does. Which begs the question, how does the world give peace? What we hear most often is after a period of violence, or after a war, after conflict. The peace of the world seems to be a peace that means only the absence of conflict. Yet when we talk about peace like a river that you can feel in your soul, then we're not simply saying that there's no battle going on. There's usually more to a feeling of peace than just the absence of conflict. Uneasy truces are not very peaceful. And peace is much more than that. After a war, there can still be anxiety and fear, but Jesus says do not be worried or upset. Do not be afraid. What He offers is a peace with no fear, a peace that is not restless or nervous, a peace that may not always make sense, given the circumstances. Probably the most famous Bible verse about peace is from Philippians 4:7, where Paul writes, God's peace which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds safe in Jesus Christ. God's peace is this peace that passes understanding. We don't always understand it, we don't always get it, but we know when it's there because we can feel it. This is the peace that let Horatio Spafford say, it is well with my soul in spite of circumstances that would have said otherwise. The world may often look at you and say, either A, let me help you throw a pity party for yourself, or it might say B, no wonder you're tired and anxious. Let's go get your doctor, get you some Xanax so you don't feel anything at all, much less tired and anxious. Whereas what Jesus says is, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come find peace in me. Come receive my own peace. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to do anything. It's offered freely. You just have to receive it. And just as Jesus tells the wind and the storm and Sea of Galilee so long ago, peace, be still, I invite you to let Him also tell whatever storm is going on in your life, peace, be still. Don't be troubled or afraid. I am with you. I don't know if peace is what's completely lacking in your life right now, although I would imagine there's at least one area in each of our lives where we're not completely at peace. It may be an outright conflict. It may just be that uneasy truce, which does not feel very peaceful. This morning I invite you to pray about it, to come bring it to God, lay it at His feet, and then wait a minute. I think sometimes we get up too fast. It's like, all right, there you go, God. And then it's like, wait a minute, what just happened? But wait a minute this morning so you can listen for God's response. And the response may be to walk away and leave it. That could be His response. Or it could be that you need to talk with someone. Or it may be that you need to give back a problem that isn't yours to solve. Or put down a burden that God never meant for you to carry. I don't know the details. This morning, I invite you to continue in prayer about it as we move into our prayer hymn. For the month of May, we'll be singing In His Time. It's found there in your bulletin. It's got 2 verses.